One of the biggest pieces of advice that early composers get is to find their own voice. To many composers, this comes across as sort of just do it, with no further explanation. How does a composer find their voice, and what does it mean to write like yourself? Especially when you're working in a medium like film music, where one day you could be writing music that is a big romantic orchestral cue, and the next it's Latin jazz. Now, to be upfront, I am working on this myself, and it is always going to be an ongoing journey. The very first thing you should be doing is listening to a lot of music. I think it's just important to listen to a wide variety of music and figure out what elements stick out to you, what you like, and even better if you can say why. This sort of active engagement with other people's work is a great way to start discovering what elements in music excite you that you want to steal for your own work. There's a saying that goes, good artists borrow, great artists steal. Knowing what music you like to listen to probably also helps you know what kind of music you like to create. Someone who doesn't like listening to death metal, for instance, probably won't write a lot of it. So keep a listening journal and start tracking all these little things you like. Oh, I really like the guitar tone on this Bleacher song. I really like the way Mason Bates works with texture. I like the string orchestration of On the Nature of Daylight. It can also function sort of like Brian Eno's oblique strategy cards. When you get stuck, just pick a random one and try to incorporate it into your track. On top of this, a wider knowledge of what's out there means a wider pool for you to draw from while composing. An artist who has been exposed to minimalism or the color green are far more likely to reach for those ideas than an artist who hasn't. So some things you should consider listening for: the way a melody develops, rhythms that are interesting, lyric structures, chord progressions, orchestration, arrangement groupings, unique instruments, specific instrumental techniques, textures. And in film specifically, pay attention to the spotting, which is a whole other video I'm going to make, but spotting I think is one of those things that doesn't get enough credit as composers. And for games, think specifically about the interactive music system and how the music is implemented. And I think this is where theory itself really shines too. Being able to analyze and understand music at a foundational level, stripped away from specific details like production, timbre, etc., allows you to see why something works, which means you can incorporate it into your work much more quickly and easily. And I think theory and all the various movements and schools of music, plus a combination of wide and deep listening, is a majority of the knowledge portion of finding your voice. The only other thing I would add is try to get feedback from composers who are better than you when you share your work. The next thing I would think about when developing your voice as a composer is just writing a ton. Exhaust every idea you possibly can. One of my guitar teachers, Connor Reese, once encouraged me to write the cheesiest stuff I can when I was starting out, because you have to be cheesy before you can be cool. I think this advice is especially relevant for composers, as we are often comparing our music to some of the greatest composers who ever lived at the peak of their careers, not the simple ditties they wrote while they were learning how to write. Or to mention any of the modern composers who don't write in the same tonal system we train starting composers on, which, again, is another problem I plan to talk about in a future video. A composer who doesn't practice writing their 4-part harmonies will write generic cliches when they need to write in that style, whereas an experienced composer will know when and how to stray from the common practice. Writing a lot, but more importantly, writing intentionally, will develop technique and competency and will help you get better at what you want to write about. Your goal should be to exhaust every possibility and try everything you can. A film composer, for example, may want to practice writing music that isn't beholden to a bar line. How do we craft a melody that goes from 4/4 to 2/4 and back to 4/4 and then dramatically switches to 6/8 seamlessly in a span of 20 seconds? And that is something that does happen on the job. By practicing this sort of thing, we really can get good at it. So when studying theory or identifying an element you like or you need to be more familiar with for work, write with it right away. By trying it in context, you develop a far greater understanding of the idea than you would in an exercise. Experience by doing is far greater than theoretical knowledge through observation. And when you try these ideas, try to exhaust them. Take it to as many extremes as you can. You may just find a completely original take on an idea that is as old as time. Now, these pieces don't need to be long, they don't need to be public, but they should be complete. By completing pieces rather than just creating sketches, you are forcing yourself to develop the ideas rather than just transcribing. And by finishing an idea, you also have a presentable piece of work that you can ideally get feedback on, or at least critique yourself with. Again, getting another composer's feedback is far faster and easier to grow than by doing it yourself, but even if you had to do it yourself, it's totally possible. So, for instance, listen critically to one of the pieces you've wrote and are done with. What do you like about it? What can be improved? How would you do it differently next time? All of these little bits of experience will add up and inform your decisions in the future. The more you do this, the more your perspective will eventually be. And don't be afraid to experiment and combine things you like. Do you like the sound of a heavily distorted guitar, but also love writing for string quartets? What happens if you combine them? Maybe you write for a quartet of electric guitars, or maybe an electric guitar accompanies a string quartet. Maybe you even get a string quartet, but all of them are playing electric versions of their instruments. These are 3 different ways to approach this one idea, and your taste and experience will guide you towards one of these over the others. But don't just limit this to compositional ideas like harmony, melody, instrumentation, texture. There is a lot of rich detail to be mined from production as well, like sound design, mixing techniques, doubling, especially as a medium composer where a live performance is secondary to the recordings. We are somewhere between composers and music producers in this field. So let's talk about that last idea about experimenting. I think it is really important to experiment in not just form, but also medium. John Williams did not start out as a film composer, neither did Bernard Herrmann, Hans Zimmer, or Johnny Greenwood. And many of the greats in the industry actually haven't. Part of who you are as a composer is writing for or about things that interest you. For example, I work mostly in film and advertising, but I spend a lot of my free time writing music for food. It's a super small niche, but I would consider that to be a defining element in my career. Writing for a specific ensemble, a specific medium, about a specific theme, or more can all be ways to define your voice over time. But don't be afraid to experiment and try whatever you can. Sometimes you may stumble upon an idea that you truly want to identify with and exhaust, like Steve Reich and phase music, for instance. One compositional idea or device can create a large body of work, but that doesn't mean that that's all you have to do. Artists have periods in their work, from Picasso's Blue period to Taylor Swift defining each album as a different era. From someone who has ADHD and tends to hyperfixate on one idea intensely in short bursts, I used to think of this idea as your own style to be incredibly limiting. But this sort of perspective I now see is very freeing. Write what you like and what you're interested in now in this moment, and write as much as possible. Over time, you will find more and more you will sound more like you, and your own ideas and experiments will start to emerge rather than relying on trying something someone else has done. And over time, you will start to find your own voice and own things you want to experiment on that might be completely original. And lastly, if you are familiar with the idea that there are many ways to skin a cat, your voice is the approach you ultimately end up choosing over others. Not everyone will choose the same approach, and after skinning many cats, what an image, you will start to be able to identify some patterns of how you approach different things. It's hard to determine what approach is for you if you only do it once. So your voice as a composer ultimately is not something you consciously define, but how others see you based on your work and define for you. The more you put out and the more consistent your taste in your work is, the easier it will be for others to pick up on a through line on what makes you you and why your music is yours. If you guys enjoyed this, please subscribe or check out my podcast, Coffee with Composers. I also have a free 7-day email course for composers who are looking to get more work, who want to learn how to find their first gig.